Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm grateful for the words of Chairman Raymond and for the dialogue that I had with Chairman King. And he said something that I thought was interesting. He said in English, but he effectively said, mañana. We'll worry about enfranchising people mañana. And I think that we've been in court for long enough, and we've restricted access to the polls long enough, and we passed this law in 2011, and here we are in 2016, and I'm saying enough. This is a very reasonable amendment, members, as Chairman Raymond said. If the ID is issued by a government entity, if the process to ensure identity has been approved by the Secretary of State's office, if it contains your photograph and the month and year of your birth, it should be sufficient to allow you to vote. And it's unfortunate that we spent all of our time during this debate, or most of our time, just talking about the affidavit. Now, the affidavit's incredibly important, but what is just as important is on the way in the number of IDs you can show, and the argument that it is going to be too cumbersome upon the Secretary of State to develop a list or to train people to identify IDs really doesn't hold water. Because even in their own bill, as a secondary form of ID, you can present an electric bill, you can present a water bill, you can present any number of forms of non-photo ID. So if we've spent a lot of time and money training our election workers to identify those things, why can't we train them to identify a discrete list of photo IDs that has already been approved by the Secretary of State?
Mr. Speaker.
It makes no sense.
Mr. Speaker.
And so what I think is happening
For what purpose, Ms. Ellis?
is that this really isn't about getting more people to vote. This is really about restricting the amounts of ID so that only certain people can vote. Because if this was about expanding the franchise, trying to do something about increasing the number of people to vote, trying to get us out of last place in voter participation out of 50 states, we'd have a bigger list of IDs. And I thought this was a regional approach. I will prepare the joint author form for the 2019 session with Phil King's name on it, because it sounds like he is open to this concept. But I would just say there's no need to do it mañana when we can do it now. Thank you, members.
Representative Gonzalez, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for 2 questions?
Do you yield?
Yes, I yield for questions. Thank you.
Did you know that in my first race, less than 5,000 people voted? So less than 5,000 people. So what I've been concerned with was making it easier for people to vote. And so all your amendment would do would make it easier for people to vote so we could have more participation, because we have limited participation in the state, correct?
That's right. Look, photo ID regimes have 2 major components. They have, the first question you ask is, how big is the list of IDs? Of photo IDs. I always said, I'm not against photo ID, as long as there's an ample list of photo IDs that you can show. And then the second thing is, hey, if you don't have those IDs, what are your secondary forms and your affidavit mechanism? So I'm dealing with the front end on this. If we have more IDs that people can show to prove their identity, then you're actually going to save a lot of time and grief on the back end, because you won't need the affidavit on the back end. You will have more people in a position to vote using a photo ID.
And so then, so your amendment not being accepted is a question as to why don't we want more people to be able to have access to voting in legal ways, correct?
And I heard difficult to train, I heard fiscal note, and those were the big things. There were sort of bureaucratic and procedural objections, and suggesting that we couldn't train poll workers to identify a list that was given to them by the Secretary of State of approved IDs. I mean, that's what we do right now. We would just fold it into the existing training, and it is far easier to produce that list than it even is to train your poll workers on that secondary form of non-photo IDs that is currently prescribed by the bill. So I don't think that argument against really holds water.
Thank you for your amendment.
Thank you for your questions. Members, really take a look at this amendment. It makes all the sense in the world. The control on it is the Secretary of State's office, and this is easy to implement, and I would please ask that you vote aye on the amendment. Thank you.
Members, the question occurs on the adoption of the Anchia amendment. To record vote, clerk ring the bell. Have all members voted? Show Representative Turner voting aye. Being 54 ayes and 94 nays, amendment fails.